You are listening to the Ghost Furnace podcast. If you have a paranormal experience of your own that you would like to share, please email it to us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please rate, subscribe, and review on whichever platform you use. Also, like and share us on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Hi, welcome to episode 9 of the Ghost Furnace podcast. After I intro the interview here shortly, we'll get to the usual conversation between myself, Nick, and Bond, though you will notice a few slight changes. From a production standpoint, every week we are trying to improve and better ourselves so that we can grow as a podcast. Our audio quality is not quite where we would like it yet, but we continue to learn from past mistakes in order to get better. And if you would like to help us grow, please spread the word about the Ghost Furnace. This week we return to Harmony, Pennsylvania for an interview with Josh Meader. Josh owns a building in Harmony which houses several local businesses, one of those being Wonder Bar Coffee and Crepes, which we discuss in episode 2. He then goes on to tell a story that occurred at the Harmony Inn, which is a local restaurant that was the focus of episode 3. I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I did. Without further ado, here it goes.
Hey everyone, I'm here tonight with my good friend Josh Meader, who is the owner and operator of the Center of Harmony. And that may sound familiar to some of you because we've had on previous episodes talked about the Opera House in Harmony, as well as the Wonder Bar, where I interviewed Seth, and also the two Frowls. And we have Josh here who's going to give us some more insight into some of the happenings around that very historical and very haunted place, and he has some other personal stories. And either way, we're super excited to be talking to Josh tonight, and just thank you for taking the time out of what is a very busy time for you, Josh.
It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. It's good to always connect with you, Brandon.
Absolutely, man. So as someone who has is basically the de facto expert on the Center of Harmony and what's kind of been going on there the last few years, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro into your history with the buildings, and then get into some of the other inhabitants that were there before you.
Sure. Well, I don't know how much of an expert I am, but I do have 9 years of experience. We just had our 9-year anniversary.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the center was originally built in 1875 as an Odd Fellows Hall. So you'll see those across the country, and they all have kind of the same general feel where there's either retail or mercantile concerns on the first floor, and then the top floor is usually a big open hall with a very, very small stage in the one corner. So they have stages and they call it the Opera Hall, but it was a tiny, tiny stage. I was able to save the original Opera Hall stage. It was in a big pile. It looked like a bonfire ready to go up. But so we had some history there. And the center, so I've had it for 9 years. All right, so the first experience I had, I was down there working alone. I've done a lot of the work on the center, so I know the building inside and out. I'm going to describe the basement a little bit because it's kind of key to the story. It's a very short, steep staircase down. It's an old sandstone block foundation, and there's not a lot of room. I'm 5'8", and I barely clear it in some corners of the building. So above you, there's nothing but the joists and 1 layer or 2 layers of hardwood floors. So when you're in the basement, literally your head is by the rafter and you can hear people talking in a normal voice upstairs. You can hear footsteps. So you know someone's in the building. And at that point, I had just bought it. It was entirely cleared out. And I was downstairs working by myself. And I was about 3/4 of the way back on the side where the two Frowls is right now. Okay. Interestingly enough, it's the place that we found all the activity in years to come. So I was down there by myself. There was nothing in the building. The doors were open upstairs. I was letting it air out. Yeah. And I heard clear as day footsteps walking at a very normal gait the entire way from the front door over top of my head, which was probably about 60 to 70 feet worth of footsteps. So it was a long, it was probably 5-6 seconds of a normal gait. And like I said, you can hear upstairs. So I'm just like, hello, anyone there? Yeah. Hello. And I didn't hear a response. And so from the time I said hello to not hearing a response, I kind of just, didn't sprint, but I jogged up the steps. Yeah. And from the top of the steps to the street is a clear shot. There was no one in there. And I was like, that's weird because I didn't hear any footsteps going out. So,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it came in and then it stopped and they couldn't get out. And I actually went back and I timed myself after this to see how long it took me from where I was standing to getting to the top of the stairs. It was 5 seconds. So if someone had to get out the building, they'd have to clear 70 feet in 5 seconds with making no sound. So you knew that wasn't happening.
That's pretty incredible. Okay.
Yeah. So I run out to the street. And if you know Harmony, there's not a lot going on. You can see up and down the street. There was not a soul on the street. I went to the parking lot. There was no one in the parking lot. I just kind of froze, like the chills came over me. And I was like, oh my God, what was that? I got freaked out. Honestly, I got freaked out, right? And so I was there and I called my partner at the time and I said, hey, can you come down? I don't want to go back into this building alone. Like really manly thing to do as I'm working on the building. I'm like, I was shaking.
Well, obviously, yeah.
Feel good there. I closed that day up pretty quickly, but it was clear as day, unquestionable footsteps. There was no one else that it could have been there.
I think it's interesting that you pointed out that like you heard it come in and then not like leave. It would be hard to get anywhere in 5 seconds silently in a building like that, regardless of which floor you're on. Like you said, those joists are right above you and there's probably not, if any, insulation between you and the next floor. You said it had like a normal gate and everything. Did it sound like boots or did it sound like bare feet?
No, it definitely
able
had
to distinguish?
No, it wasn't bare feet or sneakers. It had a little bit of a clack to it. It was definitely boots or a harder sole.
At least for me, it would be so freaky because it was so apparent to you that someone was in the building. Like your first thought wasn't like, oh, there's ghostly footsteps. You're like, oh, someone walked in the front door and is either looking for me or is checking the place out or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I figured because I left the doors open. I mean, the building had been closed up and vacant for years. So I'm sure I just figured it was someone who was curious. And it was such a normal, nondescript thing. I just heard someone like, hello.
Yeah.
Ran up the steps and I was like, oh, that's weird. Like I was not expecting it to be a ghost. I literally thought it was a person coming in.
That's almost freakier sometimes when you have that transition from like, because you're so sure you heard something. Like it wasn't like that was never in question until you realize the logistics of what you heard, Yeah,
no, there was no question. I was going up to greet someone and you weren't there. And I mean, the building, so it's literally the distance is that back hall to the restroom at the end of it was on the Two-Frau side, but it was that whole distance. So how long it takes to just stroll back that distance. And interestingly enough, when we did have someone come in and do an investigation on the center, and I was there with Seth and Laura Donna, that back corner, right where those stairs are to the basement and that bathroom is kind of the heaviest activity. It's also where the yarn shop used to be. And Lisa called the Ghost of Matilda because it was always rearranging and knocking stuff off her shelf.
Oh, really?
Doing weird stuff.
Oh, wow.
So Lisa, when she moved her shop across to another space and then Wonder Bar took it over. But that back area in the building is where all the activity was. I know Laura, Dawn, and Seth shared with you, but when we went down, Seth and I were standing in there and they were doing all the work and there was getting this stuff. And it was funny, like they were into it. And all of a sudden, Seth and I felt like this overwhelming sense of not being welcome. Like this was not friendly to men. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm good. You guys have fun. Like, let me know if my building's haunted or if you want to take it with you. That's cool. But I'm like, I am out.
Yeah.
And that was really crazy. And then those two, I think there's a young couple, and I could tell it was a mischievous ghost. I always figured it was a mischievous male because it messed with the younger women.
Yeah.
And that's what they ended up finding. It was kind of a teenage kid and his girlfriend back there. But there wasn't much hits when they did it in the basement, interestingly enough, except for the space. And I didn't tell them this, but their little ghost detectors or whatever, the electronics started beeping. It was in the place I was standing. And it was nowhere else in the basement. There was no other hits in the basement except for that one spot.
That's really compelling. Now, whenever they went through, and again, like you said, Seth mentioned to us the different kind of individual entities that he picked up on, or that they picked up on, that kind of corroborated some of the stuff, like you said, that you were thinking of the area. Did they find anything that kind of surprised you, or is there anything that maybe came afterwards that either changed over time, maybe?
No, what really, if there was anything surprising me, it was what we didn't find or where we didn't find anything. Because it's a big building, and I figured, it's just haunted all over. But
Yeah.
there was really no activity in the basement, except for that one spot. Everything was localized in that western wall behind the bakery and where the basement stairs are. There's a lot of activity really located along that side. And there was very little or nothing up in the second floor opera hall, which I kind of found surprising.
Yeah, you would, because I mean, as someone who has been in that opera hall, on a few occasions, it has a really, I don't know if it's just because of how the construction of the building or how the lines are, or there could be something environmental to it, but like that upper floor has a vibe to it that's like, I think anybody would agree. Not even saying that's necessarily paranormal, but that place has a vibe to it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I get two vibes from it. So the opera hall, and I guess just also maybe make it a little bit by way of explanation to help the listeners understand what it is. It's not the traditional opera hall in a tiered seating approach. The old style opera halls are literally just open rooms. So it's about 3,000 square feet of an open room with 11 and a half, 12-foot ceiling. So it's just a big box.
Room. Yeah.
Where is it going with that? Oh yeah. So the vibe. So I mean, I always got really good vibes up there. Like you can sense the history and you can sense the warmth. As part of my mission with the center, I've always put the health and wellness and like some of the spiritual stuff into play there. So there's been a lot of, our first event that I ever held after we opened it up was Tibetan monks coming in to talk about Tibetan herbal medicine. And they did a throat chanting
that's cool.
and building blessings. So, the room was charged from the beginning. And we've had a lot of wellness, a lot of Reiki, a lot of different ceremonies. So, and when I started doing them up there, I'm like, is this room too big and cold for these intimate things? And then when you bring the lights down or you just do it, the room just resonates and it actually feels like it gets bigger. So I'm like, well, there's a lot of energy, a lot of pathways up here. I just figured they'd be coming and going and having ghost operas and all sorts of stuff. There was nothing that they found.
That's really interesting. I would have thought there would have at least been like some kind of residual stuff up there. Again, I think good things, but you think of how many people have had positive experiences in that space over the history of that room. That has to do something. Like that has to have some kind of effect, So
well, you know what? I think that's a little bit about if you want to go as far as like the Harmony ghosts, one of the really interesting experiences I had was when I was involved with the Harmony Business Association, I was the vice president. We had a crew from one of the big paranormal shows out of California that's all syndicated across cable calling us. And we had pulled together all the ghost stories from all the business owners, and there are a lot. So we gave them all that we had, and they were so jazzed. They're like, oh my God, we've never found any place with this many stories in such a, 1 square mile. And we're like, yes, we're talking to them. And then it got to the point they're like, well, where's the malevolence? Where's the hook? Who's getting hurt?
Exactly. Yeah.
And we all looked at each other and we're like, yeah, there's really not.
Yeah.
We just all kind of live and coexist.
Yeah.
Like we know they're there, they leave us alone. And it was the common story throughout town is like, hey, yeah, we have our ghosts. They're a little mischievous, but there's not really an angry or violent vibe.
Like in the interview I did with Becca, who worked at the Harmony Inn, which we'll be talking about shortly. A lot of the folks there see the ghosts as almost like an integral part of the history, see themselves being there as a continuation of that history, and it just being kind of like one big family almost. That's so really
it's interesting, that you brought up the Harmony Inn, because that was the one of the next stories that I had, and that one actually got to me a little bit. So I knew the history of the building, 1865, the railroad baron, his private house. It went through all these owners. It was a boarding house. And all these different things. But when there was I believe it was a tuberculosis outbreak, there were 12 children that were quarantined up in the attic. Okay. And when you go to the top, and right when it changed hands, they were giving tours. And I went with it was about 6 of us, and 3 I knew very well. And so we all went up the stairs and went up to the attic. And as you get to the top of the attic, there's a wall, and on it are these tiny little black handprints coming down the wall. And it was the soot that the kids smeared on the wall. And I'm like, oh, they didn't paint that. They're like, we painted it 10 times. It keeps coming back. And I'm like, okay, so it had an odd sense to it. And while I was walking, the girl that I knew in front of me kept swatting at the back of her neck, and I was watching, and her hair kept switching, and like something was pulling on her hair, and I was watching it. And she was like, so I was like, okay, that's kind of creepy. There's a ghost right in front of me I can't see. And so we looked around, and there's a couple rooms up there. You know, you look in, and there's storage and stuff, and I'm like, it just feels uncomfortable and heavy. And I didn't like that, but nothing major. I mean, it was major enough seeing her hair move.
Oh, yeah.
To set the stage, it was a calm summer night. There was no breeze. So it wasn't like, and we were indoors, so that was moving. So before we left, and I don't know where it went, I had a video on my phone of it, but as you turn to go down the stairs to the left, there's a little crawl space, like a little alcove between the ridge lines. I turned on my cell phone camera with the light, and I was recording the video on my buddy, and I was starting to, not crawl back, but we're sticking our heads in.
Just poking around.
Right. All of a sudden you hear this like this low growl, roaring sound of wind, and there's no wind. And it hit us an icy cold blast. It was like, whoa. And we both jumped up and ran out of the attic. I was like, I'm done. Like, we looked, and I played it back on the video. You could hear the wind yielding and coming.
Oh my gosh.
It was freaky. And that was freaky enough. But a week or two later, I talked with Scott, who had done a lot of the work on the remodeling. I told him about it, and he's like, what was on the other side of that crawl space or that crawlway was even creepier. Apparently, if you went through there, it was the other side of the high pitch of the roof, and it was a big empty room. And I guess there was like 8 or 10 chairs in a circle with one right in the middle of the circle, and there was nothing else in the room.
Oh my God. I'm gonna have to call Scott about that. That sounds, oh my God. That is, can you imagine finding that?
No.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm done. Fine. I'm done.
Yeah. Like,
we're just going to put a big piece of plywood over that crawl space and leave it all in.
Just like it's done. You're just like, cool. You guys good? Cool. Excellent. We'll see you guys in another 75 years when we renovate again,
Yeah. We'll throw some beer through the hallway every once in a while.
Man, just when you think you hear everything about a place, like because you're already kind of freaked out and everything, just because you say the space is uncomfortable and whatnot, and you're already kind of primed, you're in that state already and everything. So it would be different if you guys just felt a slight breeze, or something like that. It's like, okay, maybe that's kind of creepy, but to hear that sound and then feel cold air. Again, you're someone who's done a lot of work in a lot of buildings. That's something that doesn't just happen. I'm not a disbeliever, but I'm just like, I'm kind of ambivalent. I'm like, I believe there's energy and there's all these things, and there's a lot we don't know. So I'm not going and looking for it. But the other thing of the experience, what really validated it was the guy I was with, the crawl space was probably only 3 feet wide and 3 or 4 feet high. So we were literally on our hands and knees, shoulder to shoulder in this space. And we both jerked back, and we felt it and had the same reaction. Clambering over each other. So it wasn't just like me sensing it and someone not. Like he was right next to me. We both bolted. Yeah, you're right. That's really validating that whatever it was clear enough in its intentions that both of you had the same reaction, to just be like, peace, we're out,
Yeah. And our other friends that were a little bit further away, they were probably 10, 15 feet away, They just saw us running out and looked at us, and then they came down and they're like, what was that about? We're like, you did not hear us. We didn't know. We got drove out real quick.
Now, you said you heard like the sound and everything. Did it sound just like moving air? But was there any other sound associated with the
No, because I know where I know where their exhaust vents are. They're actually further away from there on the side. And those are loud machines. No,
Yeah.
it was as if your head was in a pipe and there's a big rush of air coming. So it's
Okay.
that low rumbling of air. And then there
Okay.
was the blast, but it was just, there was a little buildup, like the air
Mhm.
was coming from a distance before we felt the blast, which was
Oh,
strange.
that's even weirder.
Because I
Yeah.
think the depth of that space was probably not that far, maybe 10 feet or 12 feet. So it's not like air
Not
would have a chance to build up, but it just felt like it was building and then it blasted us.
not a physics expert, obviously, but that seems very strange. It does not
Yeah,
seem
and
normal.
it wasn't like it was after hours, so it wasn't
Mhm.
even like the doors were opening and closing downstairs, which can cause a vacuum in houses.
Yeah,
The building was closed.
exactly. I think
So
that's
it
one
was
of the
just
key
weird.
parts.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know if I've ever heard a story even of anyone getting like a blast of air like that, like a closed space, like a crawl space like that. That just sounds so freaky.
Well, that's exactly why I went running out
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
attic. I did not care about appearances or manly. I'm like, I'm
You're just
out.
out.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
Peace.
I don't blame you, man. I do not blame you one bit. So for your first two stories, those are wild stories. And apparently you have one more for us about your childhood home.
Yeah, it was a farmhouse. I grew up from early age till about 7th grade there. It was just
Okay.
up on Scott Ridge, just north of Harmony. And it was an
Mhm.
older farmhouse. I don't know the exact age, but I think it was around the turn of the century, around the
Mhm.
1900s. It was a fine farmhouse. It was old. It was decrepit. We didn't have a lot to fix it up. But
Mhm.
anyways, it was very, very active. And the layout was unique because I guess what you would call the living room, you walked in, the family room was on the left, and then the staircase to the basement was in the center of the house. So every room was kind of around it,
Squared around it. Yeah.
squared around it. So you go under either side of the staircase, either where it goes into the second floor or at the front. It had two entrances into the living room from around the staircase.
Okay.
From that room, it
Yeah.
went out into the kitchen and into the dining room. So there were 4 doors in the living room.
Okay.
And
Yeah. I got
no
you.
matter which door you came in or what time you came in, when you walked into that room, there was always something in your field of vision that was going out one of the other doors.
Wow.
And it was just really, it was unsettling a lot of the times, but you kind of got used to it. But I knew it wasn't just me and my family, because my friends would talk about it when they come over to the play, and they're like, we don't like that, your house. There's something always leaving that room. I was like, I know. And now I'd never like full on seen it. It was always just a shadow or a form
Yeah.
leaving that room. That went on the entire time we were there. So you just kind of got used to it. However, the experience that was relayed to me from my mom was wholly different. So at the top of the stairs, you'd walk up, and their bedroom was on the far right. There was a long hall. There was a bedroom on either end, bathroom, and then my sisters and I room were on either side of the hallway. When my mom was pregnant with my sister, she was laying in the one room, looking on a bed, looking straight down the hall. And I was in school, Dad was at work. She was the only one in the house. And she knew that. And all of a sudden, she heard footsteps coming down the hall, and she looked up, and it was a woman in 1900s, like kind of farm dress, like a farm woman. And she was just staring. Mom was just staring at this woman. And she looked, and she's like, oh, don't worry. Everything's going to be okay. Your baby's healthy.
Oh.
And she's like, thank you. And then the woman walked away. And apparently Dad came home like not too long after that. She's like, hey, Bob, who was at the house? And he's like, no one. There's no one that came in, because they would have passed in the driveway. And she's like, yeah, I saw the ghost. And the ghost appeared with her husband 1 or 2 more times to my parents. I never saw him full on, but Dad described the farmer and what he was wearing. Mom saw the woman a few times. They were very kind and gentle, caring ghosts, I guess. But yeah, so I was brought up with that, and like I got used to them. I didn't know what they were, but yeah, they were always leaving the room. And I did have one closet that I just didn't feel comfortable with in my room. But other than that, that was just kind of growing up.
Man, there's a lot to unpack in that story. First off, I think that it's interesting that your mother had that reaction of just kind of like thanking her and everything. Because did you get the impression that she knew it was a ghost the first time she saw it, or it wasn't until she talked to your father?
I think she did. It was just odd because no one should have been there. She felt, and I mean, no, let me correct that. She did know it was the ghost because we'd known that they were there, and
Absolutely,
that she did know it was the ghost, but she still hadn't kind of, the rational brain kicks in, and you're like, no, someone just stopped by, or it's something weird. But and the fact that it spoke to her so clearly and assured her that everything was going to be okay, and she said she did feel a very deep sense of calm and peace with it.
Man, that's so like special. You hear lots of stories of like friendly, helpful, or just like, good ghosts, especially in situations like that where you have, I think it's safe to say, two people that probably spent a long time in that farmhouse and had a very healthy attachment to it and stuck around afterward. Again, typically, I feel like if people are good in life, they're going to be good and caring in the next world, So the fact that your mother had that experience, I mean, seeing a full-bodied apparition is like just incredibly rare to begin with, but to have it interact is like another level. And then to also get a feeling of, not to say affirmation, but like I said, almost like calm afterwards. That's just such a wild experience. And like you said, you kind of grew up with this, seeing them moving in and out of the rooms and everything, especially the main room, like you said, that had all the doors, even to the point where your friends, like everyone kind of noticed it, and it kind of freaked them out. You can kind of forgive them for that because they're not living with it. They don't know that it's just like, oh yeah, that's just part of the house, and they're cool. Don't worry. How do you think that, how do you think that informed how you looked at these things going forward? Because I mean, that's a really unique experience to not only have an active house like that, but to have those kind of experiences.
Yeah, I guess I've never really thought of it. I guess it's why I've never been a skeptic, but I've also not known. So I've always just kind of say, yeah, there's something out there. I don't know what it is. And most of the time it was just like, okay, yeah, there, little start. Sometimes it would get you when you're not ready for it.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I mean, just growing up with it, knowing like that there was something else there, I guess that probably did form, like, maybe not form, but maybe prevented the calluses of judgment or skepticism from forming over. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, something's there.
Yeah, something's there. Yeah, like again, not sure the mechanism, not sure why or how, but it keeps you asking those questions, and I think at an early age, that's really formative. So you see, I mean, you spent a long time there and everything, and you saw them coming in and out and everything. Did you have any other experiences there yourself did you have like footsteps? Did you have cold spots? Any of those kind of things?
No, I was so young that I don't know if I would remember. All I know is that, I would see movements, and I always did get the sense that they didn't want anything, they didn't really want anything from us. I did get the sense that, after hearing his mom's story and just putting it all together, that they were two people that loved each other and just probably died in the house, and they stayed there for each other. So it wasn't a scary thing at all, other than, being startled sometime, but they always felt kind. I think one other small aspect of it, that's, just as I'm sitting here in the house, because I've never had any experiences in my house, but some folk, one particular person who is very in touch and does do work in the spirit world, had spent some time here, and she's like, wow, you got some activity. I was like, never saw it.
Really?
But I think one of that things that I did learn as a kid is the boundary and the invitation.
Oh, like, yeah.
I just learned, I'm like, it doesn't have to come in or attach, and I can say no. I can hold my boundaries, and I do that pretty well in life in general. And I also have a respect for the unknown. It's like, well, if there's something out there, I'm not going to poke it.
Exactly.
I'm not going to poke the angry bear ghost. But I also know it's like, no, you're not coming into my field. You know?
Exactly.
I'm not inviting you in. And if I do, we're going to set some intentions to have the dialogue. But so I think it did kind of help in that way, just to be able to know that it didn't have to come in, and I could keep them on the outside.
Exactly. Wow. That's fantastic, man. Those are some wild stories. So before I let you go though tonight, I know you have, again, like I said, I alluded to earlier, you're a very busy man. I want to give you a sec if you have anything coming up or anything you'd like our listeners to know about that you're getting into these days.
Sure. So, I mean, if you want to see the building we're talking about, go to thecenterofharmony.com. There's some videos up there. You can see the opera hall to really feel what that's about. My business page is greatthingsllc.com, but what I'm most excited about is I am making a massive change in my lifestyle. My son is graduating college this month, and I have sold my house, I am heading out on the road. I got my truck set up. I got my camping hammock, and I'm going to drive this country until I find a place that I want to live. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'll be setting up some channels. It's called Two Cameras and One Big Idea.com. So I'm going to be sharing some stories. And it's going to be interesting as we were doing this interview. And then I was like, I wonder if I'm going to have any ghost stories from the road.
I was just about to say, you're going to have to keep us updated on that.
Yeah, I'll call you in. And this time I can do it real time. Like, hey, Brandon, remember that time when I ran out of the building? I'm calling you because I need some help right now.
Oh man, that sounds really exciting. I for one, obviously we're gonna miss having you around town and everything as much, but that sounds like a wild adventure that you're going to be going on, and I'm really excited to see where it takes you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, you'll be able to follow along, and maybe there might be some haunted encounters along the way. Although I'm not going looking for them.
Not going looking exactly. I was just going to say, like, just don't go out of your way for it. But if it happens, you know who to call. So, well, again, man, I can't thank you enough. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us this evening, and best of luck.
Thanks so much. Love what you're doing. Keep it up, and I will be listening to you as well.
So we're going to start with the first story.
How predictable.
Yeah. So just for a recap, Josh was in the basement of the center and heard footsteps entering the building on the floor above him that sounded like hard-soled shoes moving across the floor. It took him about 5 seconds to get upstairs, and when he arrived, no one was there. So, first off, what do you guys think was going on here?
Yeah, I think for me, this is a very kind of like textbook residual haunting. Definitely spooky. And I think that it's interesting that his first reaction wasn't like, oh, there's a ghost upstairs. It was, oh, someone's in the building. Because like I said, he had opened the doors up to literally air it out. And, the odds of someone just kind of walking in, just wanting to see what was up is pretty normal, But his description of where the footsteps started and where they ended, it's a pretty long distance, which I think is kind of unusual for a residual haunting. Usually you only hear about a few footsteps. He said it lasted for maybe 6 or 7 seconds possibly, which definitely is on the upper end, I think, of that range. But then the fact that there was no one there and nowhere for them to go, that had to have been a really creepy feeling, because you have that moment where you go from thinking it's a normal experience to having that realization of, oh, this is now something stranger. So yeah, I mean, those are kind of my first thoughts to that.
I agree with you that the hearing of footsteps is that classic. If nothing else has happened, or usually that's the first thing that happens is you hear footsteps. I do find it interesting that he was able to kind of tell how far they went. I think, though, only the most OCD of us are timing that, hark, I hear footsteps, nothing suspicious about it. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, so on and so forth. So I kind of giggle at that.
Engaging, yeah.
Right. No, I agree. But I do because the first thing I think of is when I'm hearing the story and I know there wasn't a person, is that, well, this, especially if it only lasts for a few steps, well, this is a big wooden building and we hear cracking of the woods. It's everything settles. There's climatic changes, this happens. Now, this is interesting specifically because it is a very deep building, and he's saying these footsteps are going through some length of it. So I did find that interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like you said, you bring up the climactic elements because, again, old building, he had opened the doors that had been shut up for a while, so, humidity, pressure changing. So if it would have been, a series of, creaks or just, even, pops, I think that would be more on, the mundane side of the scale. But again, whenever he said that they were, almost sounded like boots, there was a clear heel, toe kind of definition, I think that's not something you're going to mistake for anything else.
One thing I do want to know, and I don't know if either of you are aware, I believe the building has forced air. I believe, because there's vents when they retrofitted for the kitchen to have everything. So I believe, however, if it still has a boiler and whatnot, because my house has a hot water boiler, that's how we heat the house. And I'll tell you what, especially since, it's getting to the point where I have to bleed my radiators from air that gets trapped in there, that air will create a banging. And there are a few things creepier than laying in bed, especially when you're adjusting to having a boiler, than when that hot water starts moving, there's air and everything, and it'll make clangs and it'll travel along a pathway. So it does sound an awful lot like footsteps, especially if you're not accustomed to that sound. But I don't think that's the case here. As I said, it is, I believe, forced air heat. However, I do want to throw that out there just in case anytime these sort of stories are encountered, that would be one thing I would look for, especially again, if it's not a sound that you're accustomed to hearing.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really important thing to bring up, that like pipes in, whether it's a new or old building, can make some very, very strange sounds that are either going to be alarming, could be mistaken for other things. It doesn't sound like that's the case in this instance, but I think there are plenty of times where people think like, oh, I heard this random banging and knocking, and it very well just could have been pipes.
I think, again, the things that ought to be highlighted about this story, you've already picked on, Bond, and that's the distance they seem to have traveled, because he can hear that traveling, and the length of time it seemed to take, and the fact that he did explore, and again, as he said, he stepped outside, he can see up and down the street. Could someone have snuck away? Sure.
But yeah.
We all know this town very well. And we know, too, that around that time that he's talking about, the town was pretty, there wasn't a lot going. There was so much more going on in town. It is a much busier town, in large part to the businesses that occupy the center of Harmony, to the reopening of the restaurant up the way. About 10 years ago, there were only a couple businesses left in town, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
it's
the very foreseeable he would have walked out, not seen anybody.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's very true.
Yeah, that's a good point. With the practice of spirituality being brought into the building via chanting monks and Reiki healers, do you feel like there is any correlation between that and the reported activity that's taking place at the Center of Harmony?
Well, that all happened. This first episode he talked about happened before any of that, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Brendan,
so that was before he actually even opened up the building.
That's true. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Just to kind of expand on that a little bit, Mike, I do think that how a place is used, generally speaking, can influence A, people's perceptions of the space. B, whenever you get into the whole, which I know we've talked about before, the whole idea of residual or stone tape, those kind of things. If a place has an intent and a vibe kind of like set upon it, and it is reinforced over time, I think that can lead to either people's expectations being of a certain thing, or it can lead to heightened activity in certain places, whether that's positive or negative. In this case, I think it's been vastly positive, because you look at the place being an Oddfellows house before that, the place has always been, a gathering place for positive events for the most part. And then you have the artistic stuff being brought in, some of the spiritual stuff, a lot of the music, vendors, weddings, birthday parties, all those kind of things the space is used for. I think that the space does get charged for, in this case, mainly positive energy, but I think that can influence either what people expect out of the place, or B, if there is, again, like we talk about, or I talk about a lot, a co-creative element to this stuff, I think that it has to at least be considered when viewing the activity, because it's almost like a microcosm of the current culture or current folklore around a certain place.
That comes into, if you're bringing in spirituality, you're bringing in more formal religious beliefs and whatnot, you're already open up to these sort of possibilities. The fact of the matter is that most religions most spiritualist movements, they are based around an afterlife. There are very few that deal in just annihilation. And I think that's already saying that you are open to a belief. I never understood, there's many Christian denominations around us. I've never understood the Christian denominations that say they don't believe in ghosts, because they are in the book that you claim to believe in too, however you want to define that. But again, you're going in there and you are essentially saying, so whether, and this is not a statement of what's real or not, but this is a statement that if you hear something, you are going to interpret it through that lens, because if you are religious, if that doesn't make up a foundation of your values and belief system, then do you really believe it at all?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and not to go too far down like the rabbit hole of whether you're open to something or not. Like, you're right, where if let's say you're in a space that, let's use like something that's like a proxy place, like not there. Let's say we're at a restaurant, and you know that, like, okay, this restaurant's been active for 100 years. It's, a really old historical restaurant, and people have been, working in it for how long? Good stuff, bad stuff, all kinds of stuff. If you hear that knocking, or you hear footsteps, you're going to be much more inclined to be like, oh, this is some kind of like a residual haunting of someone who was a server here, or a bartender here, or a frequent patron. Whereas if you are in a new location, let's say you're in a Buffalo Wild Wings that just opened up, and you're having what seems like paranormal activity, your thought is going to be first, okay, well, what was here before? What's the story about the land? Because clearly this Buffalo Wild Wings that's 6 months old can't be haunted, right? Which, isn't necessarily, true or false, but I think the location and the history of a location that you're aware of has to play a part in it whenever you're experiencing those events. And again, with the footsteps that Josh heard, how many people have walked that path?
I just want to bring this up too, because Brendan, you also brought it up. Overall, everything is pretty positive, but something that Josh mentioned earlier on, and Seth also mentioned, that having an unwanted feeling in the same area. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the area where you also had your little experience too.
Me and Josh, we didn't talk about it in the interview. We talked about it afterwards. How that's where I had a bit of experience too. Where after just a little recap, after the interview with Seth on one of our earlier episodes, basically we got to this same spot, and he was like, "Hey, walk down that hallway," and I walked down the hallway, got halfway down, and just felt a very palpable, like, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about this, very palpable just change in the air. It just felt much heavier, didn't feel good, felt very unwelcome. And I kept thinking something with the window that was up top. I'm getting creeped out just thinking about this. But yeah, Josh said that for some reason there is some kind of, there's something there that makes you not feel welcome, and according to him, it seems to be more prevalent with male patrons rather than the females.
And I wonder too, and this is again another thing we always talk about: older building, older wiring. There's been at least 2 generations of wiring in that building, and I wonder too if there couldn't be we've in the literature, as they say, there are, what do they call them? Fear cages, essentially, where, an excessive, bad grounding, bad wiring or whatnot can lead to spikes and whatnot. I'm really reaching for the right words at the moment, but you know where I'm going.
Absolutely.
I wonder if there's not like a junction behind the wall there in that vicinity, or up in the ceiling, that might not be leading to those, or possibly even, because we feel pretty confident that the building is a forced air, if there's not some vibration, some
that's very
frequency,
possible.
And it's in that region.
Yeah, I mean, that would be like if that is the case, I think it would be a textbook example of these weird EMF fields causing weird, because like we know EMF fields exist, and we know from clinical studies that they can affect people
Right.
in predictable ways. And I think that would be interesting, because I don't think Josh mentioned if they got any weird EMF signals from that area. That would be a good follow-up question. Because if they did, whether it's supernatural or not, it's still like a measurable effect that a number of people have had.
Right, because even my suggestion of these two possible alternatives are wholly speculative, because I know I've been in that area of the building because I've been throughout the entirety of the building, save for the basement, but I don't know exactly which window it is, so I'll leave it at that.
No, but that's absolutely something that's worth bringing up. But kind of getting back to Mike's question, it is interesting how, again, with all the positive energy and everything, you do have these reports of not necessarily like a malicious entity, but something that's definitely like on like the more negative side of things. And like I don't think Josh really speculated on where that came from, or if there was any thoughts around it. My first reaction is just to think like, well, you have a place that's that old, you're just as likely to get stuff that's a little ornery rather than things that are happy-go-lucky.
Well, let's just talk about what you said. How many people have walked down those floors? Now, most people in general are okay. Most people,
generally speaking,
are okay.
Yeah, most people are just fine.
1,000 of them. Yeah, exactly. There's going to be one or two that are just really not going to be worth it. And there's going to be one or two that are really exceptional, but
that are
most
really
of us
great.
fall
10
in
out of
that
10.
middle of the bell curve.
Everyone agrees. Yeah.
So why would it be any different?
Yeah, why wouldn't I completely agree. And, because again, we don't know the mechanism for any of this stuff. So it's like it would, so you're right, Nick, we should use some sort of measurement that we can generally agree on, which is, most people are just fine. Some people are awful. Some people are exceptionally good. And kind of going back to what we talked about a few weeks ago about the theory that most possible paranormal or supernatural events should, in fact, by ratio, be mundane. And I think this is kind of an extension of almost that theory that, most ghosts are going to be on a spectrum of kind of like to cool. So this one's just more on the side.
That's the official measurement, mad to cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I use for most things, so why not?
So, in Josh's second story, which is yet another experience in the attic of the Harmony Inn, he witnessed a woman's hair move as if it were being pulled and encountered an aggressive burst of air near a boarded-up crawl space. So first off, what do you guys think of the observation of the woman's hair moving?
I need to say one thing before we get into that. And I do think that is very interesting because he says he was right there and saw it. That's interesting. But there was also bursts of air too, so I don't know if there was a breeze and it's just drafty. But I will say, and I need to get this off my chest, I really do, because we talked about this building a lot in the past. Mr. Pierce was not a railroad baron. He was a railroad dabbler. Baron suggested he had some sort of success, and as I've demonstrated, the historical record is very clear. He wasn't very successful and may have even been embezzling from the bank he worked at to keep it afloat until he was able to sell it. Sorry, for the record, I had to get that. For the record, he was not a baron. He was a dabbler. He was a part owner of a railroad for the better part of, I think, 2 years. Okay. That established, yes. The fact that he was right behind this woman and saw the hair go, I do find that interesting. But I like how your question mentions the draft because there was this gust of air. Could it have been a windy day? Is it a drafty attic? We know there's those portals on the side, the windows on the side. Come up to my attic sometime. It's quite drafty. There's windows on either side. It gets a cross breeze. I wonder if it just wasn't that big gust of wind was from just a good whoosh of wind outside, and that hair movement he was seeing, could that have been from that? I don't know. But I do find it, that's a possible explanation, but I do find it really interesting that he was there to witness it. And I would hope that were there wind, that he would have taken note of that too, because if it's freaking him out, he should be looking for explanations that are in the natural world. But of course, he's going there for the purpose of being scared a bit, right?
And I think you bring up some good points, and I kind of want to hear what, again, like even like what Mike you think about this, because you guys are much more construction minded than I am. But the fact that he said he heard the wind like coming first, it like I don't know, it checked a lot of boxes for it being more weird than normal, and also like the fact that the guy he was with had like the same reaction to it. I think only strengthens the fact that it was more likely to be something strange. The hair moving, same thing. Like, could that be wind related? Absolutely. But I think hair blowing in the breeze, so, as someone who has long hair and gets scared by it on a regular basis.
I love that your hair frightens you on a regular basis.
I got a story. If I had $1 for every time I thought my hair was a spider on my shoulder, I would have quite a few dollars.
Why do you keep your hair long now? Again,
I typically have it in a ponytail for the exact reason. That's a whole other story. But like hair flicking, how he described it, like is like I think is a very different motion than what a breeze would cause, and the fact that he chose to use that word, I think, kind of distinguishes the two. But I completely agree that you're right that does need brought up. Is in the same realm. The thing that stuck with me most about that one, even though you're right, Nick, he was there for like kind of like a spooky experience and everything. The fact that him and the other dude basically like ran out of there, I think says something, because you're not going to leave an experience. Yeah, I mean, again, I probably would have done the same thing. But now the thing that stuck with me most out of all of that was, I'm pretty sure this made it into the interview, how he said that all of our mutual friends, Scott, said that in that next room, it's actually open, and he said, like a number of chairs in a circle with one chair in the middle. That has stuck with me so bad since that interview.
A decades old game of musical chairs. No, that's weird, because you don't store chairs like that. Yeah,
I really need to reach out to Scott to find out if that is apocryphal or if it's true. Because again, no matter what the reasoning is, let's say someone set him up like that. A, good for them, and B, like I just need to know. I just need to know. Like,
I do like that you try to put people off with a long-term vision like that.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I love it. The dedication to the long con there would be admirable.
To know that you're setting something up that you're never going to be able to really appreciate, but just the idea, the hypothetical future payoff, I think is beautiful.
It really is. I again, if that's the case, great. I want to know about it, and I want to commend that person.
Yeah, Brendan, you asked me what I thought about it. As far as a crawl space that has no wall, I think of a crawl space having no, drywall, nothing covering the walls, no insulation. My experience with crawl spaces or attics is it's usually the draftiest place you're going to find, and if in a house, and if there is a burst of air, like a gust of wind outside, it'll come in like a burst of air.
Am I right in saying there are louvered portals on the sides of that attic too?
I haven't been out there for a long time.
Okay. I think a lot of houses you'll see that usually they're rectangular and more modern builds, but they're louvered. But I think that one has circular louvered portals. I may be wrong. This might just be in my mind's eye.
Well, I don't want to discount what Josh said, because it's absolutely a neat story, especially with the, on the other side of that plywood was this mysterious circle of chairs. And in the attic alone, at the Harmony Inn, obviously has a lot of weird stories around it. So I mean,
it just kind of adds to it's one more on the pile of weird things.
Each one of you has a weird story about that attic. I mean, Brendan, from your brother's experience, which my wife listened to and kind of chalked up to, Brian got scared and drove home was the whole story, which is hilarious. And then to Mike, your mother and her sister's experience up towards the attic as well. So I'm the only one who has not, but I've also I have also not been up in the attic.
We need to record a Hot House song up there.
Okay,
I'm down.
It'll be called In the Basement.
Okay, so I have one more question about the attic of the Harmony Inn. Looking back at episode 3, which was the Haunted Inn, Becca tells a story of seeing a small child running on the attic stairs. Thought it was interesting the connection between that and what Josh said about 12 children staying in the attic who quarantined with tuberculosis.
Yeah, that's creepy. It's just really creepy because again, it's like, and I know we talked at length about like the extent of the folklore that exists in this place, and just again how old it is too. So I mean, like, one, the odds of just like a kid being up there a lot in general is probably decent, whether that's intelligent or residual. And again, I think we've all heard the TB ward story. Whether or not it's true or not is I'm not entirely sure of.
Nick, when would that
That's what I was wondering.
When would that have been? Like, what time period?
I mean, TB was a pretty common thing. I think, there were TB hospitals that were well into operation into the 1960s.
Yes.
However, I am not aware of there being any evidence to support that there were people up in the attic for sequestered for tuberculosis. Now, that it might be true, but I've, in all my time in town and with the Historic Society, haven't heard anything to that effect. Doesn't mean it's not true. It's a likely enough building for it, but I don't know why they wouldn't have just been taken. Again, when do they say these youth were sequestered up there, and who's caring for them? Because at the time they say it was a boarding house, and why there was a tubercular hospital in the county seat about half an hour away by train. Like there was a train line well established. Who knows if they 1870s, I believe.
Yeah, I think this goes on our long list of questions for the Harmony Historic Society whenever we finally corner them, because it's gonna happen. Because you're right. Like, I think that just like even that one little bit of folklore, it's entirely plausible. Yes. But again, I've never seen any evidence for it. But
again, one way it's or the a singular other. Story.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. Yeah. One way or the other. Yeah. Like I would not be shocked if it was true or not true. Both are
Here's an interesting thing for you real quick, because this is something you might not have known, but it's another one of these sort of things where, well, that sounds plausible, but there across the creek from town, what used to be a large Jewish resort for Jewish youth in the city of Pittsburgh would drive the train up to the town, and they would walk across a bridge that is now barred off to this camp. Sometime and I've seen the film reels because a friend of mine, very involved in this historic history of the region, has the actual film. I believe it was sometime in the mid to late 30s. They actually took old people up there, and essentially people were living longer. They didn't know what to do with them, so they sent them to camp. And they have a narrator kind of patronizingly saying, like, yes, even the elderly can have fun on a summer day.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I
will
never
turn
heard
you on who has that, but it is an interesting thing. It's just one of those things, like, if you had told me that, it's the same story. That sounds like it could be true, but boy, I need to see some evidence of that, because that sounds like seems like there's so many other places or other things that. So this is, again, could they have utilized that space to quarantine, to sequester tubercular patients? Possibly, but I see it as, again, until I see proof, some evidence of that, there's so many other more likely places for that.
But I think that in this case, it's just, regardless of the impetus of it, it's one more story of a little playful kid in that place. There's tons of those stories. So, I mean, in that sense, it does kind of fit with the canon, if you will, of the Harmony Inn.
All right, so moving on to the this final segment of the interview, Josh tells about his childhood home, and in particular, the interesting story of his mother's encounter, where she heard footsteps, then saw a full-bodied apparition of a woman who spoke to her, telling her that her baby was going to be okay. So what did you guys think of Josh's mother's story?
I thought it was pretty incredible. Full-bodied apparitions are kind of like...
That's the jackpot.
it's like the holy grail of ghost hunting, you know.
Well, full body and intelligent.
Yeah, and intelligent and interacting. Like that's like
And an
that's
audio
like yeah,
encounter
like
too.
yeah, exactly. It's
The full Monty, everybody.
yeah, exactly. It's just it's like everything you could possibly hope for in an interaction like that, which is just incredible. Like I mean, it's really really wild that something like that could possibly happen. It sounds like one of these stories you hear though, because a lot of times when people have intelligent hauntings, they're usually not bad. You know, it's usually not like the scary thing in the closet. It's two nice old people, you know, in this case, that probably just really loved each other and spent a lot of time in this house, so them sticking around makes a lot of sense. And the fact that the ghost used whatever energy she may have had to make it into a positive experience for Josh's mother, again, it goes back to what we said earlier about 80% of people are just fine. It sounds like this lady might have been towards the upper end of that, where, you know, if she could interact with someone, she wanted to make it a good and positive experience. And I just think that's a really special thing. And the fact that his mother sounded like she took some solace out of it is I think that's a very genuine interaction, I think. And it's almost just like two mothers speaking about something rather than like a person and an incorporeal spirit, you know? And I just think it's a really incredible story. I think it's really cool.
When I was listening to it, I was actually struck by something outside the story completely, and that was hearing the road it was on, hearing that it was an old farmhouse, knowing that Josh is a few grades ahead of us. I wondered when they moved out of that house, because in the early 2000s, I actually dated a girl that lived in an old farmhouse on that road, and the layout of the house as he describes it makes me wonder if it wasn't the same house.
That would be pretty cool.
Which is very weird. The other weird thing I will say, again, if it isn't the same place, and it could be because they moved there, I want to say in the early 90s, early mid 90s, because they had been in San Diego before, if I remember correctly. So, Brendan, I don't know if you're aware if that matches Josh's timeline.
I'm not entirely. I wouldn't want to speak out of turn with that. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
No problem. I am curious, but one thing I will say is that one night, she and I watched Night of the Living Dead there, and it kind of freaked us out. I had seen it before. Yep. She had not. The house had the exact same layout. The exact same layout as the farmhouse in that movie, and that freaked us out.
Yeah, I know I've talked about Night of the Living Dead before on here and how it's scarred me as a child living on Franklin Road and living
the road it was filmed on.
Yeah, living less than 2 miles from that cemetery. Yeah.
And for those who haven't been there, it's not a very scary cemetery. It is not very peaceful. Old.
Yeah, it's a really nice cemetery. I've actually done a few photo shoots there. Been up there just to sightsee with other people that come into town.
And at the time that movie was filmed. No, yeah. It's not. And at the time that movie was filmed, it was a very new cemetery. Okay, getting back on track though, one of the things that I did find interesting too, and the story of the woman is like, as we've mentioned, is so over the top. It hits all the marks that it's really astounding. I don't know what to think of that, but I think there are textbook stories of there's always that shadow in the peripheral. It always looks like you're just walking into a place that somebody had just left. And even I have had that feeling. Mm-hmm. That near certainty, like I am almost certain I saw something in my peripheral vision and I'm kind of unsettled now. It sounds like that was such a frequent occurrence in Josh's memory. And again, like we talked about earlier about the footsteps, like that is one of those textbook things. Now, curiously enough, I would say based on all the reading and all the stories I've heard that the footsteps are usually associated with something being kind of ambiguous or positive, but those shadows on the periphery of vision are usually associated with stories that are much more malicious, maybe.
Yeah,
even,
in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, I'd
it's
agree.
a more brooding thing than just hearing snaps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a good thing to bring up, and I think that's why it's so interesting that the two things. One, I think it's interesting then that the interaction was such a positive interaction that she had, because you're right, there is that kind of juxtaposition, and also I think that brings up the fact that not the fact, Jesus, the idea that you can have both intelligent and residual effects in the same place. So, like, if they were seeing things out of the corner of their eyes a lot, leaving a room just as you're entering a room, like you mentioned, Nick, were those intelligent parts of the haunting manifesting, or were those of the, kind of residual nature? Again, we don't know how this stuff works, so it seems like they can both exist at the same time. But again, Josh said that it never it spooked his friends and everything, but it never really gave them any bad vibes once they kind of got used to it, which sounds more like an environmental thing more than a haunting thing, Which I just think is interesting because anytime you're in a new environment, if things are different, they can seem scary, but then you kind of used to them. You're like, oh yeah, that's just kind of how that thing is. That's just what happens there. It's more of just a matter of fact than something extraordinary.
Well, all that being said, do you guys think that you could comfortably live in a house with that type of activity going on?
If it's the house that I'm thinking of, I slept there quite a few times in the living room and on their porch. But there was no back porch light, so if I had to leave at night, I would kind of run to my car, because at that time I was driving an old car too that was kind of creepy. It didn't have it was a 1966 Chevy Caprice, and it only interior lights were two dome lights in the back seat, and I would have to run to my car, start it up, and if it was chilly, I'd have to wait for the carburetor to heat up long enough. So I'd be sitting in this dark car for 5 minutes while these skeletal trees of autumn are kind of blowing in the breeze, and there's no houses around, and there's this old dilapidated barn, and the house layout is the same layout as the house in Night of the Living Dead. Yeah. I'm freaking myself out, and now I have to pee really bad. So, but if I try to back out now, my car will stall out, because that's how old cars work.
No, but I think if I was someplace that had some sort of intelligent haunting like that had shown itself to be, friendly, I think that goes back to the intention stuff that we've talked about so many times, where I think that something like that wouldn't be trying to scare you on purpose. So if you did, it's just kind of like your cat scaring you in the middle of the night, where it's you can't really get upset about it. It just is what it is. I think that I'd almost be relieved if that was the case, rather than not knowing, or knowing that something bad was there.
Right.
What do you think, Mike?
I don't know. I've never been in that situation before. I feel like I would have a difficult time with it.
That's understandable. That's for obvious reasons. Yeah.
Maybe if you'd grown up there and you're already comfortable there, it's a different story. But I don't know. It's just always one of my concerns when I've moved is hopefully.
Yeah. No. Again, understandably so. I think we've all talked about that. Basically, anytime we've moved to a new place for whatever reason or not, because again, this isn't breaking news, but I think these things are all around us anyway. Right. A lot of times. So I think if you had the opportunity to find out it was something positive, that would be more of a reassuring, affirming thing for me. But completely understand where you're coming from, Mike.
Cool. Well, yeah, thanks again to Josh for that interview. It was really nice to get more information on a few places that we've talked about in the past. And now Nick has an experience that he wants to talk about when he's ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Sorry, my cat just caught a fake mouse, and I need to congratulate her real quick. Good job, Lou.
Give her all of our thumbs up. Yeah, we're all proud of her.
I am, because I'll tell you what, we had a real mouse over the winter, and I don't know if it was her or her brother or Seymour, but one of them just wrecked that guy. Okay, here I go. All right. So I've been sitting on this a little while. It has been bothering me. I'm going to throw it out there. I'm really curious to see what the two of you think. I'm also really curious. Anybody who's listening, email us and let us know what you think about this. I was watching a ghost show the other day, and this show had been filmed back around 2012, and they were doing their little thing talking to a previous resident who had grown up in this house. In this case, it was a woman, and she was about 40 or so. And this fact will become important in a moment. The house in question was the home of a suspected serial killer, and he had been the suspect in a high profile murder in Los Angeles back in the late 1940s, as well as potentially a couple other murders. But this lady said that while growing up in the home, she would hear or feel the presence of the man, and how sometimes it was footsteps, sometimes it was other things. Her parents would have these experiences as well, and she stated that her father specifically said that it was the spirit of this infamous person, and they had their reasons to believe as much. Now, my problem is that this suspected serial killer didn't die until 1999. This is just fact. It's a known thing. Again, this television episode came out in 2012. Conceivably, it could have been shot in 2011, but let's be generous and keep it at 2012. I felt pretty confident that this woman was 40 or so, but let's again be generous and say she was only 30. That means that this guy would have died when she was 17. So, of course, this is a painful display of nonsense whistle blew. But then I started to think about the whole stone tape hypothesis, which, as I understand it, suggests that moments in time, through some sort of mechanism, be they electrical energies or whatever, are embedded in such things as quartz and or iron and or copper, and that something can trigger this event to replay akin to a cassette tape or VHS, and hence this title of stone tape. Now, these materials are used to create computer memories, such and so on. So, this is true, and I'm putting aside right now the question as to how or by what mechanism, or other questions as to the predictive capability and whatnot. Okay, let's just operate under this stone tape thing holding water for the purpose of this discussion. That would mean something important. That would mean that ghosts aren't necessarily deceased. In fact, it would mean that you could theoretically run into a ghost of yourself. That this supposed possible serial killer, wouldn't have to die in order to haunt the possible location of at least one murder. There are plenty of issues with the stone tape hypothesis, but this seems like something, this possibility of ghosts being laid like eggs every day, that I think believers in the hypothesis themselves haven't adequately addressed. And again, I'm really curious as to both of your responses, as well as anybody listening, what they would like to come back with.
I mean, I've heard of stuff like this before. I mean, basically, it's an intense moment of time that gets captured. I don't know if that would be something you would call a ghost or a spirit. I don't know what you would call it, but there's probably a different name for it. So, by this logic, if that were a ghost, then everyone you're watching on TV or any movie or anything is technically a ghost too.
It makes me wonder too if, it's usually a bad event that triggers these things, right, by this traumatic. As far as, again, the story goes. Why wouldn't it be like how many, like the New Orleans Superdome would have to be haunted? Because imagine all the emotional everything going on during the Super Bowl. How come, like, when thousands of people could see ghosts of these former games, these emotional highlight moments?
Yeah, no, I think that I have a lot to say about this. Okay, one, I think that, Mike, you actually hit upon something interesting there, semantically, by using the word ghost and spirit interchangeably for these phenomena. Like, can you have a ghost of yourself be around while you are still living? From a romantic notion, I would say yes. I think that when we talk about storytelling and we talk about our past selves and how we kind of like interact with time, I would say people have gone to, their childhood homes and run into ghosts of themselves. I think that when we use the word spirit, we are using it as a proxy for giving some sort of definition to a incorporeal form generated by this theory, this stone tape theory. We have to call it something. So we use the word ghost, we use the word spirit. But I think you're right that doesn't fully... That's not the most accurate word we could probably use for it. Because again, I think that if we were I don't think there's examples of people interacting with a still living person in ghost form intelligently outside of like maybe certain spiritual practices or like remote viewing or things in that kind of realm. Sticking with the whole stone tape thing, I think that whenever you have an event, whether good or bad, it can imprint on the environment in some way, shape, or form. There may be a level to which, whether that intensity is positive or negative, it is more likely to embed. Or it just takes a long time if there isn't any intensity. Maybe that's where the residual stuff comes from. Again, not because, like we were talking about the steps earlier in Josh's story, maybe that wasn't that person walking on the best or worst day of their life, but just they did that so many times. Sometimes it replays, If that's the case, why would there be a necessity for that person to be deceased somewhere else? Like, I think you're right, Nick, that it's never addressed, that the correlation between those things doesn't necessarily need to be there. Because if we're talking about energy imprinting, why does this current state of where the energy came from somewhere else matter? If I have a car on a road and I leave a drag strip going in front of someone's house, doing a burnout in my 68 Impala, why can't I go somewhere else and do the same thing later? They're both evidence of something happening at one time that was intense. You don't see one and go, oh, well, that car is done now. I think it's a presumed connection that, you're right, doesn't hold much water.
Here's one thing, and this is changing the topic only ever so slightly, but this bothers me. When earlier you spoke to Josh and he talked about a TV show being super excited, but because there wasn't some sort of malevolent angle that they could utilize, it wasn't good for story. You in particular, in our conversations, have spoken about that there is an entertainment aspect to all of these things. Of course, they have to draw you in. Mm-hmm. The story is what gets us. So because there wasn't that, I was thinking, would it have been that hard? They talk so much in this show about this suspected killer. Why wasn't somebody fact-checking and saying, hey, based on the typical narrative of ghosts that we have, this story doesn't line up, because we know for a fact you can find the person's death certificate online. He didn't die until I think it was May of 1999. This story doesn't add up, and then use that as maybe a springboard to enter the conversation here, or at least give some sort of half-hearted attempt at saying, well, we don't think it's this person, but...
Well, yeah, no, I think you're right. I think what it sounds like to me, you're right. It's either one or two. I think it's either one or two things. One, poor fact-checking, poor production. But most of those shows, for the most part, at least like the big budget ones, from what I understand, like the production teams are like pretty top notch. So them missing stuff.
But the angle of exploiting the serial killer aspect is too good.
Like that could have been a production decision where they're like, you know what, there's a problem with this, but it's too juicy. We're just going to go with it. It could have been a production decision, but I think you're right that I think more importantly, and this happens a lot where people don't give the audience much credit, because it would have been a great opportunity to be like, hey, normally in hauntings, the person's dead. But here's an example where this person was experiencing these effects, these paranormal happenings, while the person was sitting in jail 300 miles away or whatever. That would have been, to me, a much more interesting angle for them to approach the investigation, and it would have been more honest.
I agree, but it also would have been going up against we spoke our last time together about there being kind of an archetype that's established about here's the tools of the trade, here's how you approach it, even if some of those approaches don't always make the most sense. I think any emergent idea or whatnot is having to push against an established order of things. And I think the established order of things is we kind of are all aware of it. Somebody dies, traumatic event, embeds or is captured in that place. And there, by those means, a haunting happens. And so this is kind of a different thought on that, but
I think
you see where I'm going.
No, I completely agree. And I think what you're trying to say, and I think we're on the same page on this, is I think it is an excellent example of how in a field / entertainment genre / spiritual movement / whatever you want to call all this stuff, there are still paradigms that are fought against. You see it, and it's happened before, and it's going to happen again. There's still paradigms, there's still dogma, there's still gatekeepers. All of those things still exist in this realm. I think an excellent example is someone who all of us really appreciate is Stan Gordon. Back in the 70s, when he was saying, hey, I'm not saying aliens and UFOs and Bigfoot are the same thing, but we have a lot of Bigfoot sightings around these UFO sightings. People acted like it was
heresy.
Yeah, all the crazy people like us were like, man, that guy's crazy, But now that's like a common connection. People are like, oh yeah, there seems to be a lot of UFO sightings around Bigfoot sightings. No one has any idea why, but it took 30 years for that to become a more accepted thing. So I think what you're onto, Nick, with this idea of if the stone tape theory is in fact, has anything to it, or even if the intelligent hauntings have anything to them, what, if any, is there a connection to that person still being alive or not? Like, why should that matter? I think that you're just running what you found is another just small paradigm shift that at least the production companies don't think people are ready for.
I think Brennan said it good.
Yeah.
Like Mike said earlier, if anyone has any ideas on these things, please let us know. Because
as always, we invite your criticisms, your input, and definitely if you have any stories of your own that you would like to share or you would like to get in contact us. Mike, how can people get in contact with us?
They can email us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. They could also find us on Instagram at the Ghost Furnace Podcast, I think.
Yeah, it's just the Ghost Furnace Podcast. Yep.
Well, that ties everything up rather nicely, I think.
Yeah.